I'm Patrick Pacheco. Coming up on Theater All the Moving Parts, a chat with Ken Chernelia, who worked on Hadestown as that most mysterious of creative talent, the dramaturg. Hello, I'm Patrick Pacheco. Welcome to this virtual episode of Theater, All the Moving Parts. Today's guest, Ken Chernelia, is a crucial player in drama and musical development as a dramaturg, an art he applied in his 16 years at Disney to countless productions, including Tarzan, Newsies, Frozen, and Hunchback of Notre Dame. Most recently, he helped guide Hadestown to Tony Award-winning success. Welcome, Ken.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
It's good to see you. So here's a question you've never heard before. What the heck is a dramaturg?
That's a great question. If you ask 10 dramaturgs what a dramaturg is, you'll get 100 answers, at least to start. My current favorite analogy for the uninitiated in the theater is a dramaturg is akin to an editor in a publishing house. So an editor will work with, say, a novelist, and being that sort of first line, the first response to a draft, and trying to get that thing, that novel to its best possible place, to champion the author's voice, but also to ask questions about, well, who's going to be reading this, and what, where are we going to go with this thing, and also to put a novel in context in a publishing house's other work. So I do that in the theater. Right, so I'm going to be working with playwrights primarily to figure out what their voice is, to be a first sounding board for drafts to help to develop it, but I'll also work with directors on their vision and trying to get everyone, in the same boat, in the same stream, rowing in the same direction, mostly by asking questions. And so I'll also work with producers, designers, I work with actors. To be that person looking at the whole forest of a play and its production in context, in culture, historically situated, to try to get it to be its best possible thing.
On some fundamental level, are you a stand-in for the audience in the development process?
Sure, yes, I'm always thinking about the audience and who is this play for? Who is this musical for? Who do we expect to come? What's the target? And that thing, that can be a moving target as you're developing a work. Who's this going to be? So I'm constantly putting myself in the position of the audience, but audiences are diverse. I have my own point of view, but I try to step outside of that as much as possible to be asking about, like, what is this thing going to be like in the theater? When is it going to come? Is this a 2021 audience, or the thing we're developing is like 5 years into the future? And we want it to live longer than that. So I'm always asking contextual questions about the audience. Is this going to be on Broadway? Is this going to be in a grade school? Is this going to be in Korea, right? you're always asking those questions, and where can a piece most vibrantly live, and how many different audiences can you address with your given play or musical?
And to what extent are you the critic in the process, or acting as the critic in the process?
Dramaturgs and theater critics often have very similar backgrounds in dramatic literature and theater history, in structural analysis. So sometimes people would say, oh, the dramaturg's an in-house critic, asking all those important questions about what we're doing and trying to, be that sounding board before the journalist, the theater critic, gets to evaluate it on the other end. So trying to anticipate some of those questions. So absolutely bringing a critical apparatus to the show, but also a healthy dose of cheerleader and moral support, and really wanting as much as everyone else to get this thing to be successful.
And Ken, in terms of the process itself, at what point are you invited into the process? For example, at what point did you come into Hadestown?
Ideally, as early as possible, because the work of a successful dramaturg is being part of the team, gaining the trust of a team. Coming in late to a process is always, just like any kind of group, right? Everyone who's in the group is looking at the new person and be like,
Mhm.
Who's that? Should I trust you? I don't know, right? And if you're coming in with this sort of critical apparatus, that can be viewed as something negative, right? Someone's coming in to judge us, which is definitely not the case. Maybe to analyze where we're at, to evaluate where we're at, where we want to go, and how to do that the best. So it's really gaining the trust of the group assembled. And some of the most important work I do as a dramaturg is trying to figure out what is this thing we're doing? Why are we doing it? And these fundamental questions. And so coming in quite late to a process can be difficult. Now, Hadestown was already 5 or 6 years in development, past when Anais Mitchell had originally started writing the songs and developing an original community theater piece, and then touring that as a concert, and then getting an option and working already about a year or two with Rachel Chavkin, the director, who's also a fantastic dramaturg. And I got brought into the process at New York Theater Workshop because Jim Nicola, who runs it, was like, this is really fantastic work. And here you have Rachel Chavkin, who's directing it, and Anais Mitchell writing book, music, and lyrics as a first-time dramatist. And so Jim thought, hey, maybe another brain in the room might be helpful. And so I was invited. I auditioned. There were other people that interviewed for the gig, and I got it. And then met these fantastic artists.
As obviously with Anais Mitchell, as with Phil Collins on Tarzan, you worked with people that were not conversant with musical theater structure. What were you able, as a dramaturg, to inform them about that was crucial?
I think the thing that I can bring to the table most is like, oh, well, what are other pieces that are similar? You know, whose shoulders can we stand on to bring some other options for structure to the table? Like, how do these songs work? How does this tale work? You know, Tarzan's really interesting because if dramaturgs will know about dramatic structure. And so, what is the plot structure? And a play begins when you have an inciting incident that makes this day different from all other days. And when you actually look at Tarzan, is the inciting incident comes at the end of the first act, which essentially makes the whole first act prologue. And then the play is in the second act. So it had a really unique dramatic structure. And so trying to figure out, well, that's the structure of this musical. How can we make this the best thing we can?
Uh-huh. And one of the most crucial questions that you have said you can ask it to the creative team in general, maybe specifically to the composer, the director, and certainly the writer, where is the fire? Where did they locate the fire in Hadestown?
Yeah, that's the essential question to me. I wrote an article once about the dramaturgy of appeal, and I said, you can have the most dramaturgically sound musical ever, the best structure, all the things in the right place, but if it doesn't light a fire in the audience, it doesn't matter. So I think the most successful thing that you can do as a dramaturg, particularly on a musical, which of course is tied to music and tied to emotion, is identify that fire. And Anais would talk a lot about Hadestown and like, what's the vibe of the piece? Every show I work on, I have to learn how to dramaturg as we get into it. So I have to figure out what is the thing that's burning in it? What are the structures that support that? And how do we refine those in order to connect with an audience? So I think the thing about Hadestown was this really kind of visceral experience of the work. And when we did it in New York Theater Workshop, it was in the round. All of the audience was very close to the performers, which I think dramaturgically can cover a lot of the flaws in the storytelling, because you're just so swept away by the experience of it. And as we moved Hadestown from in the round to up on a proscenium stage further away from the audience, it laid bare some of the things that we needed to work on. And so we had to shift some of the vibe of the piece toward the story. Well, why are we here? And what is the story? And what is the structure that can then reach across a set of footlights to the audience and connect in that way? So it shifted over time from where Hadestown started to where it is now. I think we kept the fire alive, but in a different form because we needed to, in a different house.
And where was the fire in Tarzan?
Family.
Uh-huh.
I would say that fire in Tarzan was family, and to look at two different cultures, one that we're born into and one that we grow up in, and what's that combat of that. So really looking at the intimacy of the piece and identity and how that's tied to um, who's around you, but also, that kind of DNA, who's that person inside you that's in your physical body who you still have to discover. And that was exciting. That's what I still love about Tarzan so much, and about Phil's music. It's just so rooted in the ground and in percussion, right? Like one of the best drummers in the world. And I was like, oh, that's special. And the role that percussion played in terms of just the kind of like primal rhythms of the heartbeat of life. Like that's what's special about Tarzan, is really getting to the roots of life, of person, of family, of community.
What makes you temperamentally suited, Ken, to be a dramaturg?
I think I'm curious. That's probably the first thing. So I ask questions, which is a good occupational hazard. I think if you're going to be a dramaturg, every room I'm in, every play I tackle, every time I sit in the theater, I'm genuinely curious about what's going to happen next. And so, because I think, as I said before, dramaturgs can be perceived perhaps a little suspect, like, you're coming in to judge. I think because I come at it with a genuine curiosity, I think that can perhaps bury some of my critical apparatus, because I can come at the things that I'm really curious about, or I wonder if they're working, with a set of questions, because I genuinely want to learn from the people that I'm working with, and I genuinely want to go on a discovery, an expedition, a dramatic expedition on a play, and develop it, and see where we go. So one of my favorite bits of feedback to give is, I don't know yet. I don't know what's happening. People are like, well, how is it? I'm like, not sure. I mean, sometimes I do know. I'm like, I think this thing is in place and this thing here. And this part over here, this scene, this song, I don't know if it's achieved its full potential yet. So let's keep going.
And must you be sort of psychologically sensitive to when to ask those questions of the creative team?
Yes. And so the fact that I have a BA in psychology from UC San Diego may help me out a little bit. I was, there was a point in my career I wasn't sure. I'm like, I want to get a PhD. So am I going to go in psychology, or am I going to go in theater? And I applied to schools in psychology. I was definitely going to push forward in that, because, again, I'm genuinely curious about human behavior. And that's the thing that the field of psychology and the field of theater have in common. They just come at the study of human behavior in different ways. But I had a lot of experience doing counseling and working with some troubled populations. And so I think that sort of patience and that sensitivity to the inner workings of human psychology, particularly my peers in the room, and what they're going through on a different day. And the artistic journey is one of personal vulnerability more than a lot of other professions. And so to be sensitive to that, and to know that I'm like, we have to have this conversation about the work, but today is not the day. So we may do that tomorrow, and or sometime later. And the more experience I get, the more patient I am with some of the things that I see, and maybe some of the feedback that I have to give. I've learned that many of the problems in a play are obvious to other people and will work themselves out. So I can hold my tongue, and I've learned to hold it longer, because I actually don't have to be the person who's right in the room. And in fact, I prefer not to be. And if something I have a feeling about needs to be addressed, I'll wait as long as possible to address it, to see if it can work itself out, or to see if something else that I may never have seen manifests, right? And so it just may show itself and we go in a different direction. I'm like, great, I never had to give that note.
In your 16-year tenure at Disney, what were some of the great teaching moments as a dramaturg for you, and on what shows?
Oh, so many. One of the great privileges of working at Disney for all that time is that I got to work with some of the most talented people in the world, because Disney got to bring them together. And I got to learn from all Tom Schumacher's experience at Disney, and Rick Ellis, who you interviewed here, and Bobby and Kristen. And, I get to study with like David Henry Wong and Doug Wright and Chad Beglin and Harvey Fierstein, like some of the best dramatists in the field of musical theater I got to learn from.
Well, let's take Rick Ellis on Peter and the Starcatcher, which you worked on, obviously.
Yes.
What did you learn from that experience that you could apply as dramaturg?
That was a real treat, because I got to work on Peter and the Starcatcher before Rick was even on board. Even though, depending on which version of the story you read, that was his idea to begin with. But I got to be in a room with Alex Timbers and Roger Rees and a book. And that was the first time that Disney deigned to do that, is to adapt something that hadn't been dramatized before. And that was a treat. So to get to work with Roger Rees, Nicholas Nickleby, right? And all the experience that he brought to the table, and Alex Timbers and all of his success with Les Frères Corbusier, and these two terrific directors from different generations who had a vision, and I got to work with them to like, let's put it together. And so just instincts about storytelling, how to engage an audience, how to paint a whole world with words. That's what I learned on Peter and the Starcatcher. And then when Rick quickly came on board to script this thing, we worked really closely, and I learned everything from him.
And were you able, through your research, to add value to that specific production?
Absolutely, because this Peter and the Starcatcher is a prequel to Peter Pan. So we'd have 100 years of J.M. Barrie's play and novels and every other kind of adaptation, including Disney's of Peter Pan. So we brought those to play, and we were trying to identify what Ridley Pearson and Dave Barry had done in these novels, and we based on the first novel and some of the rest that led up to what we know as Peter Pan. So we're just putting those items in the mix, and also J.M. Barrie was dealing with tons of tropes that already existed in the 19th century. So we tried to pull those into a 21st century play. So yes, we had a lot of ideas and a lot of etymologies, and like, what does Peter mean? What does Pan mean? And I have a short anecdote about the name Peter. And Rick's Jewish. I was raised Catholic, and we tell him like, well, Peter means rock, and Peter was the first disciple in Christian cosmology, and the whole church was built around Peter. And so I just brought that up to Rick. It happened to be something I knew, but also had researched. And so he actually put it into the play. When Black Stash names this boy who doesn't have a name in the first act, which I love. So that was Rick's choice. And he's like, trying to come up with a name for this boy. I'm like, Peter, you'll solid name. You'll be my rock, right?
Oh, Peter! Yeah, I like that.
Evocative as a Madeleine in a Proust novel. Now give me the trumpet.
Those little bits that you can just sprinkle in, and Peter and the Starcatcher is just full of references to a lot of different things.
You mentioned that obviously a good part of your job is to contextualize this play now in the 21st century. I would think that Hunchback of Notre Dame, given its sexual politics, is pretty dicey and challenging in a Me Too era. How can you address that problem for the production?
Yeah, we talked about that all the time. And including, conversations with our actors too, and Sierra Renee, who's starring as Esmeralda, and, to really look at where does she have agency, and to look at many layers of storytelling. That again, we're talking about a Victor Hugo novel that was set many centuries previous to when he was writing in the 19th century. So we did a lot of historical research, and a director and developer, Scott Schwartz, was really interested in the 15th century in Paris. And so I did a lot of research around that. And like, what was the role of women? What are we talking about? We have prostitutes who are characters in this, and here's a Romany woman, a gypsy, although we were working away from that name for obvious reasons. So we're still trying to, do something that feels historically consistent, but we're telling the story from our place and time. And so in this patriarchy of 1482 that was also abusive in many ways, how do we tell that story on stage in the 21st century? How do we give these characters who were kind of lower than the low some agency and some hope? And so part of the story is just connecting this yeah, this character Quasimodo has a physical deformity and is, locked up and cloistered with someone else who, in a different way, a woman, a Romany woman who is, also cloistered. How do we connect those two? And so these marginalized characters come together and lift each other up.
And certainly another issue that is burning today, and that is equity in the theater. How can a dramaturg help bring about more equity in the theater?
That's a really good question, and thank you for asking that. I felt fiercely about this for a very long time, and I think those institutional dramaturgs and literary managers have a very important role, mostly in diversifying the candidates for consideration in different creative hires. One of the things I'm proudest of is Disney started a new series of high school plays, one-act plays based on Marvel characters. And so another dramaturg and I who were curating this, we made sure we brought to the table our candidates for playwrights that represented the diversity of American ethnicities, race, gender, to make sure that this collection was going to reflect who America is and who America is becoming. And so we were very happy that our first pool of writers represented, 4 people of color and 3 men and 3 women. And so we're like, yeah, this can be done. You just have to work a little bit harder to learn about artists who you may not know, because we're all drawn to people who are like us. So we in the theater, it's incumbent on us to stretch further to find out who are the people who are different from us, and really trying to mine all of the talent that's out there and bring them into the pool of consideration. The more that we do that, the more the shows we'll put up on our stages reflect the diversity of the audiences we hope to come to the shows.
In a world that is so emotional that you deal with, is it hard to maintain objectivity?
Sure. I think it's my responsibility to try to maintain some objectivity by asking bigger and bigger questions, kind of backing up from the show as much as I can to see the forest from the trees that make up the show, to also see, how the show is working on its own in the theater, but also in context, in historical context. If it's a show that's, coming to Broadway, like what else is on Broadway right now? What has been on Broadway recently? Where do we want Broadway to go? How can this participate in this? And so, I think anyone who can claim 100% objectivity is lying or just blind, right? Like, yes, I do have my own aesthetic. Yes, I do have a subjectivity, and I do bring that to the room, but it's my job to back up and to ask questions about objectivity, even if I will never be able to deliver it 100% myself.
We should say that Hadestown is going to be the first show to reopen on Broadway.
Isn't that interesting?
Post-pandemic period that changed the world, or changed our world, let's say that. I don't mean to be so solipsistic about it. It did change the world as well. What can you, as a dramaturg, help usher Broadway back in?
I'm thrilled that Hadestown will be one of the first shows back. We'll see if other shows adjust their period as things are looking good now, and we're thrilled about vaccinations and that the thing that we do as theater makers of being in a room, breathing the same air at the same time, the fact that was the thing that is the most hazardous to people's health, right? This thing that we love that's so good for community, we can't do right now, and that we'll be able to do it soon. So what I could do as a dramaturg is celebrate that. One of the things that we've done at my trade guild, Literary Managers and Dramaturgs of the Americas, is when the pandemic hit, we started a program called Dramaturging the Phoenix, which is to ask dramaturgs and people in affiliated professions to just imagine what theater would be like when we rise from the ashes. You know, what have we never been able to do that we can do in the future? And what are the things that we have been doing, perhaps taking for granted, that are not the healthiest things? What are those things that we can leave behind when we move forward? And I think we've all, you know, collectively done a lot of soul searching that has been long overdue, but here we had, amid a tragedy of health, this opportunity to really examine these fundamental questions about our art. And so in my field as a dramaturg, I now bring that question to every table, is asking who's in the room, who's missing from the room, how can we make this process more equitable, how can we make this production more equitable, and to be the squeaky wheel if I need to be, because it's my responsibility as the one asking the big questions to do the right thing, ask the right questions, and to ask questions about what we don't know yet is the right thing or will be the right thing.
Well, keep asking those questions. You're very good at it, and you've been doing it a long time. So,
Thanks very much, Patrick. Thanks for this conversation.
Sure, it was my pleasure. Thank you for spending time with us. And thank you for joining us. We look forward to bringing you more fascinating conversations with artists and thought leaders as New York theater, that fabulous invalid, regains its invaluable place in American culture. I'm Patrick Pacheco.